everyone, and welcome to the latest CTO Craft Bytes. Today, we are absolutely honoured to be joined by Christina Forney. If this is your first time at CTO Craft Bytes, let me tell you a bit more about this group. CTO Craft is a mentoring and coaching community for technology leaders around the world, focusing on supporting technologists in their leadership growth. Community members are over 8,000, and CTO Craft provides them with one-to-one coaching, mentoring groups, a curated Slack community, and events like this one. If you're not a member of the CTO Craft community and are interested in becoming one, or you'd like to get updates on these events by email, we're posting some links in the chat to help you do just that. So huge thanks to CTO Craft sponsor partners for helping to make these Bytes events possible. Partners including AWS, Google Cloud, O'Reilly and Pentalog, amongst many others. CTO Craft membership gives you access to some unique benefits from some of these partners. So click the link in the chat to find out more. And an additional thanks to Uplevel for sponsoring this particular event. So I'm Zoe Cunningham. I'm a director at Software Technology, having worked there for over 20 years, starting as a coder in the year 2000. Now I engage with the tech community through events like this one, as well as hosting the software podcast, Tech Talks, which is available on all good podcast platforms. So hello to Christina Forney, who is the new VP of Product at Uplevel. Christina, can I ask you to tell us a bit about yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. Hello, everyone. I'm Christina. I'm the VP of Product at Uplevel, as Zoe mentioned. Uplevel is an engineering intelligence platform that empowers engineering organizations with data-driven insights. I have a background in engineering, and I've ebbed and flowed between product and engineering throughout my career. I've largely focused in the developer tools space, first building internally while running an internal tools team, and then later shifting to build for a wider developer audience. I'm really excited to speak with you all today about measuring engineering productivity, as it's been something I've thought about for a lot of my career. I believe in building healthy team cultures and ways of working that create high-performing and empowered teams.
Amazing, don't we all? So, yeah, I'm really looking forward to this talk. Christina would love to have questions from the audience, so please do enter your questions in the Ask a Question box, and I will be monitoring that to make sure that we get all the questions to Christina at the end of her talk. And obviously the chat function is open as well, and we'll keep an eye on that too. So yeah, over to you, Christina.
Super, thank you. Let me just get my screen shared. All right. Hello, everyone. Again, I'm Christina. And really excited to talk to you about this topic today. Let's start by talking about, what does it feel like? Most of us have experienced the feeling of being on a high-performing team, but it can be hard to quantify why that team was high-performing. However, I bet you can all describe what it felt like, though. So please go ahead and share what are adjectives that come to mind for you in the comments. Some that come to mind for me are empowered, focused, momentum, clarity, engaging, motivated. Trust, absolutely. Thank you, Chris. I would also bet that you've been part of a low-performing team in your career. What was different? What are adjectives that come to mind for you when you think about that team? Please go ahead and keep sharing in the comments. I'm going to make this pretty interactive. I do have a little bit of delay, but super. All right, so some words that I think about when I think about low-performing teams are roadblocks, frustrating, process, toil, ambiguity, misaligned, wasted work, instability. Yeah, absolutely. Cynicism, lethargy, self-conscious, insecure, uncertain. Absolutely. It just feels really different. What's interesting is that it isn't even necessarily isolated to a company culture. I've seen these traits within the same company and even on different teams. or even some of the same people at the same company moving teams and going from high performers to low performers. So the real question is, how do we help low performing teams become high performing teams? And how do we know what good looks like? If we think about other functions of an organization, sales and marketing have playbooks. They have standard metrics that they look at and they report on, and you can see how they're performing based on those metrics alone. There are clear, established ways to measure the impact of a marketing team. And there are clear, established ways to measure the impact of a sales team. These two fields, and maybe surprising to some people, are incredibly data-driven, and it makes it much easier to identify where a problem lies in your process, way of working, or organization. Now, I believe that engineering is a whole other beast compared to sales and marketing. It's complex, it's creative, and there's a lot of hidden work and costs that you really only feel when something goes wrong. So I want to start out this conversation with some questions to get you thinking, and we'll make sure to get them answered today. How do I create an organization with high-performing teams? What information do I need to understand my organization? Is DORA the solution? What do I do once I have this data? So before we dive in, let's ground in some historical context as we think about the answers to these questions and the problems that they help us solve. So first, a short history lesson. The very first software was written in the 1960s, and it wasn't until 20 years later that the internet was born. It took another 20 years for the Agile Manifesto to be introduced, and shortly thereafter, we started seeing developer tools enter the space. Jira was introduced, I know, everyone's absolutely favorite tool. Jenkins followed shortly thereafter. And it's only been in the last 20 years where the public cloud has made computing far more available and no longer relies on the purchase of really expensive servers and the necessary infrastructure to support it. It was this shift that really changed a lot for us. Previously, computing was incredibly expensive, and it was the limitation for how quickly we could innovate. Now, we have what seems like unbounded compute power for relatively cheap. And it's the number of people who can build software that is now our limitation. We really didn't start talking about continuous delivery until 2009. And it wasn't until 2014, only 9 years ago, when DORA was first introduced. And it took another 4 years for Accelerate, the book, to be published, helping to spread awareness of the DORA metrics. We're still introducing ways of measuring engineering teams. The SPACE framework was introduced in 2021, and that was not even 2 years ago. This is something that as an industry, we're still evolving our thinking around. Engineering leaders collectively haven't aligned or agreed on what to measure because this kind of thinking is still really new for us. We haven't been thinking about this for very long, and yet it kind of feels like we should have figured this out by now, doesn't it? So zooming out, the role of technology has drastically changed with the explosion of computing and technology. Every company is now a technology company, whether they want to be or not. And that means for many large organizations, they are learning to operate in new ways. They are operating outside of their core competencies. They are learning to build software. It may be shocking to some of you, but there are many companies who still operate in old ways of working. They haven't adopted the public cloud, and they're really struggling to figure out how to take that first step on their digital transformation journey. That means that as an industry, there is a really wide spectrum of the maturity of an organization and the maturity of its technology. And I would bet they're almost inversely related. On top of everything we've talked about so far, we've had some massive market shifts in the last 2 years alone that have really changed a lot of what's going on in our software industry. We went from a bull market where VC money was flush and companies were growing and spending in what felt like an unbounded way. We couldn't hire talent fast enough. And we were seeing all-time high salary numbers across our industry. Oh yeah, and we had just navigated a global pandemic, and the world figured out how to work remotely. We faced burnout and quiet quitting, and it felt like our biggest challenge was keeping our people and keeping them happy. In contrast, we're now seeing mass layoffs across the industry, with thousands of people losing their jobs. Companies are needing to do more with less, and that once really slim talent market is now flush in the talent pool. These massive shifts are requiring entirely new ways of thinking and working, and it means that now more than ever, high-performing teams are in demand. Bear markets tend to bring imperfect alignment to the surface, and it drives engineering leaders to keep their teams on the same page and focused on what the business really needs to meet its goals. And the successful companies will be those who can do more with less to maintain focus on business priorities, retain their people, and make the most of their time and their budgets. This is the state of the world of technology today. Okay, that was a lot. I want you to take away from all of this, though, is that this is new and it's complex. And if you're struggling with it, you're not alone. There isn't yet alignment on how to measure engineering teams, and there's a wide distribution based on where companies are on their digital transformation journey. So, to get people talking to each other, I'm gonna make this interactive. Can folks please share with each other in the chat, what is the biggest challenge you are facing with your engineering organization today? What you'll notice as these start to stream in is that while each problem is inherently unique to your organization, industry, and teams, there are commonalities with these challenges, and we can support and learn from each other as we go to start solving them. Before we go any further, I want to make sure that we as a group are all aligned on some key definitions, as not everyone thinks about these terms in the same way, and that can lead to misunderstandings and frustration. Efficiency is working faster with less effort or fewer resources. Within an engineering organization, this comes from finding ways to optimize, reduce overhead, or automate manual processes so that developers spend less on manual or repetitive tasks and more on deeper work that provides more value to the business. The dictionary definition of effectiveness is to be successful in producing a desired or intended result. A simpler way to say this is to work on the right things in the right way. This is felt most acutely as an engineer when you put your heart and your soul into this new feature only to get shifted away from it right before it's finished and never get it deployed because it turns out it was the wrong thing to be focusing on. Lack of alignment is a key source of ineffective organizations. Velocity is the speed of something in a given direction. It's how fast your team can move forward towards an important initiative and how much their tools, processes, or red tape get in the way. Capacity is the maximum amount of time something can contain. It's the total available time your team has to get their work done. When you factor in vacations or other out-of-office meetings and interruptions that get in the way of work, you're greatly reducing the capacity of your engineering organization. And then finally, productivity is the combination of effective and efficient effort or work. In the dictionary, it states that productivity is measured in terms of the rate of output per unit of input. And this can be really hard to quantify within engineering organizations because you ultimately need to be able to measure the value created for the business, because the real output that matters is the value to your users and the company. Because of this, we prioritize understanding efficiency, effectiveness, velocity, and capacity to tell a clearer story of what's happening within your organization. Okay, so during our short history lesson, I mentioned 2 different frameworks that have been introduced in the last few years that are being used to measure engineering productivity today. I'd like to start with a little discussion about those. DORA metrics are seen as a fairly accepted standard for measuring software development performance. It's comprised of 5 different metrics that provide insight into the velocity, stability, and reliability of your systems using deploy frequency, lead time for changes, change failure rate, time to restore, and your ability to meet or exceed reliability targets. Ultimately, it's helping to give you a picture of your operational and execution health. Looking at the 2022 Accelerate State of DevOps report, we can see the shift over time, and then a drop in 2022, with elite teams not showing a large enough differentiation from high-performing teams. One possible explanation for this is that we're seeing survey fatigue, with fewer teams performing at the elite level taking time to fill out the report survey. One thing to note here is that because the benchmarks were set based on survey data and not actual computed data, it's possible there could be something very different actually going on across these benchmarks. DORA metrics are really, really helpful if you aren't measuring anything today, but they do have diminishing returns. Once achieving high or previously elite levels of performance, it doesn't help making them even better. And there may be some organizations where medium levels of performance is good enough for them, and they really only give you a sliver of understanding of your engineering team performance. Similarly, I've heard sentiment from developers at companies who are falling under this elite category, and they just really don't feel like they're working on an elite team. And that's because this is only one aspect for understanding what's happening across your engineering organization. SPACE is a newer framework, and it was developed by some of the same folks from DORA. It's meant to have a more encompassing view of the organization, making sure that you consider the 5 different aspects of your engineering team: their satisfaction and well-being, their performance, their activity, how they communicate and collaborate, and their efficiency and flow. SPACE offers some suggestions about types of metrics to manage, but it's really not clear about how to really measure each of these areas. We don't yet have benchmarks, and it leaves a lot open for interpretation, which is a pretty heavy burden for folks who are just entering or starting to think about how to measure engineering organizations. Now, if you go and search for engineering metrics, you're likely to encounter some of these other metrics listed here. Things like review to merge time, story points, number of bugs or code quality, time spent by area, time spent on planned work versus unplanned work, the cost to support existing product lines. It's a lot. And if you try and track everything, you can end up in this situation. Too many metrics can be almost as unhelpful as no metrics at all. On top of that, you get what you measure, and that can have unintended consequences if you aren't thoughtful. Number of bugs, facepalm, yep, totally get that. Keep talking to me in chat. I appreciate hearing from you and seeing you all engaged. So, what does good really look like? I'd love to hear from any of you who feel like you've really figured this out. But I'm guessing that many of you may be thinking, Christina, why do you think we came to your talk in the first place? Get to the point already. I'm here because I thought you were going to tell us what good looks like. But we have an hour together today. We're only about 20 minutes in, and I've got a lot more to say. But since we're all turning to pumpkins, let's have a little stretch. So please humor me and join in. I can't see any of you, so I'm going to trust that you are humoring me as well as my in-person attendees do when I do this exercise. Arms up. Give me your twinkle hands. Stretch. Swivel your wrists. All right, the other way, we've got some carpal tunnel that we have to combat. All right, shrug your shoulders up, hold, release. All right, and one more time, shoulders up, hold, release. Okay, wiggle it out. All right, thank you for tolerating me. If you actually participated, now, how do you all feel? Better? What I observed from this exercise is that most people are smiling a lot more than you were just a moment ago. What happened here? You all might think I'm a little bit crazy, but if you did choose to participate, I bet you do feel a little bit better because I took a moment to care about you, to give you some space, to take a pause, to treat you like human. People matter, and the humans behind the work matter. And that's been missing from everything we've talked about so far. And as we talk and think about engineering teams, we need to remember that teams are made up of unique people, and that means every team is unique too. The reality is, what good looks like isn't the same for every team. What productivity looks like for one developer can look entirely different from another. And similarly, the metrics of a healthy team can look completely different from teams within different organizations, with different missions, with different humans. What is consistent are the categories of metrics that you need to consider and the value of transparency and understanding what is happening across my entire organization and how my team fits in. Okay, so zooming out and thinking about an engineering organization, what are the three categories that you need to consider? As we just experienced, people, how they are doing, how they are feeling matters. We should consider metrics that support building healthy, empowered organizations. We already spent quite a bit of time talking about execution health, ensuring that your systems are stable and reliable, and that your tools aren't hindering velocity. And finally, your process health, digging into how we're actually collaborating together, whether or not we're effective and efficient as an organization. Together, these three categories paint a picture of your organization, and they start to give you a perspective of what's going great, what's doing okay, and what could use some support or improvement. So we'll dig into each of these and the metrics that contribute. As you think about the different metrics within these categories, it's important to note that there are often correlations between them, and what's missing is the context of what's going on within an organization. You can use these metrics to understand, but it's really important to make sure you consider the context of what's happening. So, starting with people health, here is an example of understanding deep work. If burnout is tanking on your team, is it that people don't have time to do work, or is there maybe a different problem? Is it that maybe there's a big planning or strategy spike, or is maybe this is just a sustained problem? One of the things that we discovered at Uplevel is that there is a fairly strong correlation of always on and deep work metrics across organizations. And what that means is that if folks aren't getting time to do their deep work during the day because they're spending too much time in meetings, getting interrupted, they're still going to try and create that time for deep work after hours to get their work done. Similarly, looking at context switching can help you understand if your teams are being task switched too often. So it combines the number of tickets your teams are working on with chat interruptions and kind of what is going on. And so you can have a better picture of what's pulling on my team's attention, and am I being interrupted just far too much? Both of these different metrics that we've seen are indicators of burnout, and they can be used to predict if your team is operating at their best. because you really don't get great, effective, and efficient work from people who are burnt out. All right, switching into execution health. Many of these metrics come from DORA standards and ultimately is how you understand your stability, reliability, and velocity. This particular chart is an example of what you can learn by looking at cycle time across your teams. What you're looking at here is the time from first commit to release across the teams within an organization. You can see that some teams, that time is pretty short. But for others, their median cycle time is well over a week. And the more interesting component here being the outliers that are taking a really long time in development. This, as a leader, helps you ask questions about why things are getting stuck. Are teams not breaking down the work into small enough chunks? Is something else slowing us down in our release pipeline? The data here helps you start the conversation to uncover what's really going on. Another interesting view is cycle time by stage of development. This helps you understand what development stage is contributing to those longer cycle times that we saw in the previous chart. So for most teams here, the bulk of the time is being spent in review, that dark blue color. But it's pretty healthy in about a one-day time frame. However, there are two teams that we should take a closer look at. The very top bar, the cloud interfaces team here, is spending a much longer time in development compared to the rest of my teams. And so I'd like to understand what's going on there. A good first step would be to have a conversation with that team's manager. The other group that's most concerning to me is the second bar, the core data team. Here we can see that they're spending a much longer time waiting for review, which is that light blue color, compared to all of the other teams that we have here in this chart. This is definitely something I'd like to dig in deeper on to see how to unblock progress for this team. Something interesting I might discover is that this team is split across time zones. And so this extended waiting time is due to waiting for folks to wake up and review the next day. Or it could be a process or expectation setting change that needs to happen within this team. Either way, I now have more information to understand what's going on and how I can help my teams as a leader. Okay, shifting into our last category, process health. And as a reminder, process health is an indication of how well you are collaborating and working together, such as our organization's meeting health, sprint health, or how we're investing our time across key initiatives. The first chart shows how my teams are spending their time in meetings. I can see here that Scrum meetings are taking up almost 40% of all of my team's meeting time. Does that seem right based on how my teams are collaborating? Does it seem like too much? Separately, this kind of a view would help me understand the overall time investment. Do I think there's enough time being spent in one-on-ones or working sessions? Maybe we're pushing for more cross-pollination to reduce knowledge silos. So I'd like to see the working sessions increase significantly over the next month. And if that doesn't happen, I can go start asking some questions of my teams. This next view shows the health of our sprint processes at a glance. So perhaps we're doing a good job of planning and getting our work done, but people are burning out because it's just too much. I can see where people are oversubscribed at a glance, or where we're just not doing the right kind of planning or right kind of project understanding. Are PRs getting stuck? Are we adding in issues? Are we making good choices about how we're managing our sprints? Finally, we can take a look at how our teams are investing their time across our most important initiatives. In this chart, I can see a concerning trend of increase, keep the lights on work over the last 4 months. Perhaps this was an intended investment due to production failures that happened, or maybe this is silently happening behind the scenes. And then as a leader, I didn't realize that my most important initiatives are only getting a really small amount of the time investment that I would expect. And so this gives me an opportunity to, again, Ask questions to understand what's going on within my organization. Just quickly seeing a bunch of questions. Oh, cool. We'll come back to that in the Q&A at the end. Super. All right. Okay, so now what? So you remember our definitions from earlier. When you think about using metrics, it's really important to understand the outcome and impact that you're trying to achieve. What matters to you? What matters to your organization? You might want all of these things, but taking them all on at one time is a recipe for disaster. Focus on your biggest area of opportunity, fix it, and actually measure that change. Then find your next biggest opportunity. When looking at metrics, it's important to take a supportive lens and to protect the privacy of the individual. We never want to stack rank, and instead we want to look for ways you can help. We want to empower teams to help them solve their problems and give them cover. With more data comes great responsibility, so use it wisely to empower rather than to micromanage. Create transparency and visibility across your organization. By creating a shared understanding of the biggest challenges that your organizations face, teams will have more buy-in on process changes. As an example, maybe we think we are spending too much time on sprint meetings, or maybe we are spending our teams aren't getting enough deep work time, and so we want to help them focus. And so as a leader, a way that I want to support that is by having teams have a focus day where there's a no meetings day across the organization. Now, there may be some teams who don't feel like this is a problem for them, and kind of having a mandate from leadership to move all of my meetings off of a certain day can feel like an annoying burden. I'm really frustrated. This is getting in my way. It's just, I don't want to do this. I don't want to update my calendar. I don't want to move things around. But if they can see, and you share that data, that the organization as a whole is struggling to get focus time and deep work time, they're going to have a lot more buy-in of like, oh, it's not just about me. It's about my organization. It's about supporting my peers. It's about creating a culture within our organization of creating space for deep work. They're going to be a lot more bought into making that kind of a change than they would if they're just kind of forced into a different policy. Okay, we made it. We started by grounding in the history of our industry and realizing that we're still at the beginning, and that our industry is going through a really massive shift right now. We aligned on definitions, making sure we had the same understanding. And we talked about frameworks and metrics of what exists today, and remembered that too many metrics isn't great either. Remember, we're all figuring this out together. There are some good standards you can start from. Just make sure you're thinking about the outcomes and the impact. So, if you only remember this, there is a place to start. You're not alone, and you do need data for better decisions. But really, the 3 takeaways that I want you to remember. You need a holistic picture of your organization to truly understand what's going on. You need to understand not just our execution or operational health, or how we're collaborating, what our processes look like, but that people matter, and understanding how your people are doing is an essential part of understanding what's happening across your organization and how you as a leader can help. The second is create alignment using transparency and visibility. This shared understanding of what is going on across our organization builds trust and builds buy-in. And finally, be good, don't be evil. Leaders who inspire the best from their organizations create empowerment. Don't do things like stack rank. It doesn't drive the right behaviors. Okay, I've shown you the numbers and frameworks, but as leaders, we have a gut feeling when something isn't going well. We are human and we should trust our intuition as leaders, but you do need data to back it up. Also, make sure that you're being humble enough to invalidate intuition with data. Don't use data to reinforce a false narrative. So, what does it mean to have a good engineering team? As an industry, we still aren't aligned on how to measure it, but we do know what it feels like when we're in it. And I look forward to continuing to define this all together. All right, I'm going to jump into the Q&A. I'm happy to chat more here. Thank you all for participating and talking to me. And yeah, I'm excited. I saw a bunch of questions around how is time gathered. I'm also going to, let's see, pull up the questions. Aha. What tools were used to extract the metrics and create the charts, please? So with Uplevel, we connect to your code repositories. So we look at Get Data. We connect to your work management systems like Jira. We connect to Calendar and Slack. And we do this all in a way that obfuscates the information. So we're not actually looking at your code, but we are looking at timestamps. We are looking at commit times and time between commits and complexity of PRs, but we don't actually pull over any code information. Same thing with chat. We're not looking at what you're singing, but we are looking at the timestamps and the metadata around the conversation. So perhaps we're able to connect a few different pieces of this information. So as an example, I've got deep work. I've got an open 3 hours on my calendar. And so then we can see, did I actually get some deep work done? Are we seeing commits and work that was happening during that time? Jira status is getting updated, that sort of thing. And then we combine that with other information, or perhaps I was getting interrupted a lot in Slack. And so the reality is, while I had, 3 or 4 hours of time to do deep, hard thinking, I wasn't actually spending my time doing deep, hard thinking. And instead, I was spending a lot of time answering questions in Slack. And that was taking me away from getting my most important work done. So again, just to reiterate, we use a combination of code, information, project planning, calendar, and chat.
So no, just to tie it back to the comment in the chat, though, there's no manual timesheeting that you're using.
Nope.
Cool.
We're able to pull all of this in through what we're looking. The different data sources, and what we've found is it's much more accurate. Because a lot of times teams are asked to do this kinds of level of how much time are you spending on each thing. And when you're relying on feelings, that's not grounded in data. And so being able to actually understand what's happening is a very interesting story. And when those things are different, it actually opens up really, really interesting conversations.
Fantastic. Just quickly, are you all right to share the slides? And I think
Yes.
that's something Megan will be able to send out afterwards.
Yep, absolutely. Happy to share slides.
Amazing. So just going through, have you found a reliable way to move stakeholders away from time cost-based feature development towards outcome value-based delivery? So based on DORA or SPACE, etc.
Yeah. This is a really good question. I think an analogy that I like to use here, because I don't actually think that DORA and SPACE necessarily help you measure outcome and value. I think that is kind of that next area that we need to explore in how we figure out how to actually measure value and outcomes rather than output. And so I analogy that I've used with some teams or when I'm talking to less technical folks to kind of explain what we're trying to do here at Uplevel is, I don't know if many of you are familiar with different budgeting systems. I like this example because it's totally outside the realm of the engineering space, but most people are familiar with a tool like Mint, mint.com, where basically Mint retroactively tells you how much did I spend in different categories. It tells me how much I am spending in different categories. But there are newer tools. My one personal favorite, a little plug, is YNAB, or You Need a Budget. And they're shifting your mindset towards proactive, allocating your dollars to do different jobs. And so rather than reflecting back and saying, oh, shoot, I spent too much money on sushi again, I'm able to proactively say, hey, actually, I only have $20 left in my dining out budget. I'm not, maybe I can go home and have my friends come over for a pizza instead. Love YNAB, big fan. But similarly, we don't even have the Mint for engineering organizations to have that holistic retroactive view of what is happening in an organization. And the next step is, how do we get proactive about it? So at least at Uplevel, we feel like we've got a good kind of foundation of, this is what Mint looks like. We have the Mint, right? We can tell you these are the metrics. We can look more reactively. And we're starting to push the boundaries of how can we start to predict what's going to happen next? How can we help you set targets and timelines? So that's really kind of cutting edge and future thinking, but you have to start with the Mint. YNAB couldn't become a thing if we didn't already know how we were spending our money. A big part of the process is, how have I spent my money so that I can set my budgets accordingly and have them be achievable targets and not just aspirational ideas. So I think it's a really interesting analogy to thinking about engineering metrics is we need to start with shared understanding. We need to all know how much money we're spending in each category.
Yeah, I can see that, because with senior stakeholders as well, you want to push them towards outcome, thinking about outcomes without just coming up with outcomes that they would like that aren't achievable. That's the other thing that strikes me about it, getting the shared understanding so that you know what the space is you're playing within.
Completely. And as another kind of example, we saw the allocation chart that I shared, and that showed a really large amount of time spent in keep the lights on work. So a team may be responsible for this most important initiative, but if they're spending like 80% or more of their time just doing customer support issues or bugs or things to just keep their systems running, they're not going to be able to invest the thinking in building out these most important initiatives. And that's a massive disconnect between what leadership thinks needs to happen and the reality of what's happening within your development teams. And so the goal here is to create alignment across these groups so that they all understand and can have the conversations that need to happen.
Fantastic. Should we move on to the next question?
Yeah.
What data would you love to capture to get an even better signal for team performance?
Yeah. We have on our roadmap, we are going to be adding in CI/CD and incident response tooling as kind of extra signals. What I think is really interesting is not just getting more accurate in how we represent things like cycle time or breaking down work or velocity or delivery, but it's the integration of that information into some of our really unique people metrics. So for example, incident response information tells us when people are getting paged. How often am I getting paged? How often am I on call? And those are things that contribute to burnout and satisfaction and toil and frustration. So really excited about those. Those we're going to have this year within Uplevel. And then going from there, things that I have heard a lot from leaders and organizations that I personally relate to as a product leader are integrating with things that can help us get a better understanding of outside of coding sources. So how much time am I spending in documentation? Do we have documentation? Higher level planning kind of tools. While we haven't made any decisions about how we're going to move that forward, but one of the big questions that I hear and have myself is maybe our engineering teams are executing exceptionally well, but they're building the wrong things. How do we figure that out sooner and earlier? So these are kind of some of those big questions that we're, as an organization, grappling with that we don't yet have an answer for, that I'm super excited to figure out.
Fascinating. Okay, so does your tool work with calendar optimization tools like Clockwise? Because people block their focus time either via Clockwise or manually.
We don't currently work with a tool like Clockwise, but we can see those calendar blocks. So if we can see your calendar, we can see where you're getting your focus time. And so it's a kind of a nice partnership there where you can use Clockwise to optimize timelines across teams, and you can get more of the holistic view of how are we doing. So questions you can ask around meeting health for your organization is, are we just spending way too much time in meetings? Do we have a volume of meetings problem? Do we have a scheduling of meetings problem, meaning our calendars all look like Swiss cheese and we only have we have these weird 30-minute blocks where we don't actually get anything done and are just kind of wasting time and costing the organization. But reality is, like, we don't have too many meetings, we just need to organize them better. Or is it another problem? So we let you kind of see that holistic what's going on and help you dig into what the problems are, where you can take action on what are the next steps, and a tool like Clockwise can help you as a support system.
All right, we've got a big question now that I think we could probably talk about for ages. So what is the biggest pitfall when people start with measuring team performance with frameworks such as DORA?
Yeah, if you're only using a framework like DORA, you don't have the whole story. And again, to reiterate, if you're measuring nothing, measuring something is good. But if you have the opportunity to look a little bit more broadly of, like, what is happening across my organization, you can get really focused on something that's potentially not our biggest problem. So I think that's a pitfall that I've seen leaders fall into, is I'm so focused on helping my teams ship faster that I'm not realizing that we have this whole other problem, that if I just fix this other big problem, it would unlock even more than focusing on shipping faster. It's that diminishing returns. Maybe that's not and so this is where you really need to consider, as an organization, what is our biggest challenge, and use that to inform what are the questions that I want to ask and what do I want to think about. And then how do I understand all of the opportunities and where I can have the biggest impact.
That was a really, because I feel this is such a big area, and I feel you've summed up really neatly about getting to the right information. Is there any, but for me, you've opened this question of, you don't know what you don't know.
Yes.
So yeah, how do you deal with that?
You use a tool like Uplevel that gives you a picture of what's happening. So you have to start, again, starting by just understanding what's going on is a great point. And there's a lot of solutions. And Swiss cheese calendars is a solved problem, but guess what? Many organizations have not solved that problem. So while it's a solved problem, not everyone has adopted it. And you may not know that that's a problem within your organization. So using a tool like Uplevel for having this understanding and creating that shared understanding, not just at a leadership level. I think there's a lot of tools on the market right now who are really focused on being engineering leader tools. And something that I deeply believe is that we're bringing the group and the team along with us. And if you just solve for building an engineering leadership tool, an engineering leader doesn't need one more dashboard. But if you can create a shared understanding of what is happening and bring your team along with you, you're ultimately solving the deeper organizational problems. And it aligns to what you need to do as an engineering leader, because you're accountable for building a healthy and successful organization. But if you're too focused on just the engineering leader, you leave the teams, who are the people who actually have to make the change, behind.
Yeah, and hence they're less motivated or don't see the point of it, or yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, great. We've got more questions about Uplevel.
Yeah.
So how does you ready to just go?
Yeah, I'm reading it. All right. How does Uplevel compare to our competitors? No problem putting me on the spot. Happy to talk more if you want to reach out outside of this conversation as well. If any of you are interested in learning more, I'm happy to meet with you separately or one-on-one. But a big differentiator of Uplevel is we are the only tool in our space who are connecting to Calendar and Slack to give you this view into your people health metrics. And so if people health is something that's really important to you, to add into this layer of what's happening across my organization, that's where we're most differentiated. I think we're the only group also talking about organizational wide buy-in and solving for the organization rather than solving for just the executive or building a tool to help teams deliver faster. We're really trying to connect the dots across those groups.
Yeah, super. I was just reading the comments to see, like, is this people still talking about this topic?
There are some tools that connect to Calendar as well. I think we're the only ones that are really pulling it together into these kind of people health type metrics in this way, though. And if there's more, I'll go do some research. There may be new folks in the space. GetDX is really interesting. They're much more based in survey data, which is really interesting. We aren't yet currently looking at survey data to understand sentiment. And that's a really interesting kind of additional lens into what's going on across our organization. We're starting from what is the story of what's going on that people maybe aren't talking about or telling us about. And you can supplement that with sentiment data that comes in through satisfaction surveys or otherwise.
And I think that's what you were talking about before, isn't it? The idea of what people think is going on is not necessarily what is going on. So you're looking first at what is going on. And actually, if you also had the sentiment data, you might find that people's calendars are Swiss cheese, but they don't notice, or, they think their calendars are and they aren't, Yeah, very interesting. Carry on.
Yeah, I was just going to say, like, a really important part of all of this, and this is what we talked about, throughout the talk today, is like, you have to have the data to start the conversation, but it's about this deeper understanding of what's happening and how do I apply the context of my organization and my unique group of people and my unique situation. We have similar patterns, but really you have to know what's really happening behind the scenes. Did we just go through a round of layoffs and that's contributing to all of this dissatisfaction? Or is there something else going on where we have this sustained burnout problem because we're pushing people, or like, what is really happening underneath? And you have to kind of uncover, look at the data and apply the context to tell the story of your organization. And that is what tells you where to start and what to focus on. Yeah.
All right. Well, we've got 7 minutes, so I'd like to encourage, if anyone has a question that they want to get in just before the end, then please do. I think you did a really great job, Christina, of talking at a high level, because so much of the answer is in the detail, right? This isn't a topic where there is one answer or there is a broad answer and you can just go, give me the book of like engineering productivity and I'll just apply this. It's super complex. So I'm really impressed by how you managed to explain that without having to go into the detail. I always get stuck in the detail, like, no, but I don't understand it unless we look at this and this.
Yeah.
And great to see how applicable it is to people watching in all kinds of different situations and with different challenges for their teams, right?
Yeah.
Thanks,
Absolutely.
Mark. All right, well, thank you all so much for joining us today. Thank you again, Christina. That was an extremely enjoyable way to spend an hour. If you'd like to join with Christina after the chat, we're going to share links in the chat for you to connect with both of us. And next week, we're going to be joined by Leonardo Andreichi. Leo will lay out what are one-on-one meetings and why they are important for high-performing teams. He'll explain how to have great one-on-ones with your direct reports, strategies for getting started, and ideas to convince your leader to have them with you as well. He'll frame this technique in the context of people management with practical examples of experience during the last decade. And the event page is now in the chat. So yeah, hope to see you all there, and everyone have a great week.
Thanks, Zoe.